Unit 24 focuses on post-war America, the years immediately following World War II. So we'll look at, the different dynamics that are occurring as we are entering a stage after a victorious World War II. Kind of setting up things in reference to the last unit. Remember that World War II ends with the simultaneous occupation of Nazi Germany by the Soviets, Americans, British, and French in Europe. So all four of these nations, primarily the Soviets and the Americans, are occupying Germany. And it also ends with the surrender of Japan after the dropping of atomic bombs on two of their cities. Now, remember that the surrender, because of the dropping of the bombs, prevented a full-out invasion in which the Soviets would have been invading from one part of Japan and us from the other. So it kind of saved us from a similar fate of Germany at the end of the war, where both Soviets and Americans are in occupation. During this time, the Allies are starting to have differences as the occupation is occurring. And I put Allies in quotation marks because this was always a tenuous alliance. This was always a shaky alliance between the democracies of the United States and Britain and the communist nation of the Soviet Union. Their union was because of a common enemy in the Nazis, not because they had the same ideology. So there was always this kind of tension and distrust between the two sides. As the war is ending, the United States wants all of the nations that were formerly controlled by the Axis powers, primarily Germany, to have self-determination in establishing their new governments and or democratic-friendly governments. So their expectation is as they or Britain or France or troops from the Soviet Union, as they are clearing out those countries of the Nazi forces, they want their expectation, the American expectation, is that those nations have the right to determine what kind of a government and or a democratic government. The Soviet Union has a different priority. They are wanting a buffer zone to prevent future powers from invading their nation. This is really a sore subject for Russians, and it wasn't something that was just since the communists had taken over there, but really you're talking about centuries of history in which the Soviets had been repeatedly invaded from the West and wanted to have friendly nations that would serve as a buffer zone for future invasions. So they are encouraging the establishment of either communist nations or Soviet-friendly nations in the East. And so resentment is occurring on both sides. On the home front, kind of to overview the unit, kind of what we'll talk about in some of the specifics of the slides, the United States was saved from war on its land and the benefactor of great production. This gives it a great position in the post-war. We didn't have to endure bombings on our land. We didn't have to, rebuild our nation. And in fact, we had kind of built the war engine itself, and it put us in a very favorable position following the war. In fact, the world would regard the U.S. as the top power in the world in those first few years, and it's a position we've pretty much kept since those first few years after World War II. And you have an emerging rivalry then occurring between us and our World War II ally, the Soviets, creating a rivalry and even fear of communism from within our nation. Focusing first on some of the domestic dynamics in our country following World War II. First, I want to start with the GI Bill. Now, I want to take you a little bit back in history. Our nation had a history of disgruntled veterans through its various wars in history. We, on one hand, I think in America, want to, think that we honor our greatest heroes. In my personal opinion, our greatest heroes, the men and women who go off and put their lives on the line to protect us. We want to hope, I think, that we treat them well and hold them in high regard. But the history of our nation is that veterans have not been treated the best after some of our major wars. And I can give various examples. I'll give a couple here as you see on the slide. Starting with the birth of our nation, the Revolutionary War veterans who pull off the biggest upset in, probably the history, one of the biggest upsets in the history of warfare in defeating the British, returned home after the Revolutionary War to lost jobs, ruined properties, no compensation from the government for their valor. We didn't have a strong enough government to do that, and it created problems and tensions and even, rebellions like Shays' Rebellion that led to us creating the Constitution. Forward to World War I as another example, where World War I veterans in the early years of the Depression march on Washington, calling for them to receive a promised pension that they weren't supposed to collect till the 1940s, which led to really the fall, as we saw here in just recent units, of the presidency, helped with the fall of the presidency of President Hoover not being reelected in 1932, with death and really kind of a hard-handed breaking up of that demonstration. So that kind of reminds us that there had been issues throughout our nation's history that we hadn't maybe stepped up to the degree that I think most Americans would have hoped to after those wars. Well, World War II was different. World War II gave us the GI Bill, and we seem to do it more right at this time, where the government passed the GI Bill, which gave various benefits to the veterans that were coming back from World War II. For example, it gave them affordable home loans, access to a college education, and etc. So it was an attempt to be, I think, proactive in honoring our nation's heroes after their efforts. The next domestic dynamic that I want to cover following the war was the birth of the generation we call the baby boomers. Their parents that fought in World War II, that single-handedly produced the war machine during the war, was referred to or is referred to as the greatest generation. Their children, primarily those born between 1946 and 1964, are referred to as the baby boomer generation. And the reason is there was a boom or dramatic increase in childbirth occurring after the war. A lot of veterans returning home from the war, a dramatic increase in the rates of childbirth. They would ultimately, and we're going to refer to the baby boomers in future units, but they ultimately will challenge many of the traditional norms in American society in the 1960s. So when we see the civil rights movement, the hippie culture, some of the countercultural things, this is all associated with the baby boomers. But as far as this unit goes, just understanding that there was a dramatic increase in the childbirth in the country, and that generation is referred to as baby boomers. And the final focus on domestic-centric or focused issues following the war was the passage of the Taft-Hartley bill. And this is significant because we had talked about in the last unit how the 1930s were the most friendly pro-union decade probably in our nation's history. FDR seemed to support the unions and passed legislation as part of his New Deal that made it a lot easier for them to be recognized and to operate in a way that they would want. But you see with Taft-Hartley a shift that kind of is counter to that. It passed in 1947. It basically restricted the power and activities of labor unions in America. So you can see the government taking kind of a step back from what it had done in the 30s. Now on to more of the foreign policy issues in the post-war years. First, I want to talk about the establishment of the United Nations. Now, remember back in World War I, the establishment of a League of Nations? That was President Wilson's 14th point of his 14-point proposal to hopefully, in his mind, end war for good. He took that to Versailles after World War I, and it was, for him, sadly, not followed or adopted at the peace conference. Europe, if you remember at the time, was more interested in revenge and really kind of ganged up on Germany instead of kind of following this path of world peace that Wilson was proposing. The one thing, though, that he did get passed was the League of Nations. And what the League of Nations was a worldwide representative body that in his mind would meet continually in an attempt to solve world conflict. However, for President Wilson, embarrassingly enough, our American president's idea wasn't even adopted here in his own home country. Instead, Congress chose a path of isolationism in the 1920s, and as part of that chose not to join the League of Nations. Well, the United Nations is kind of a redo of the League of Nations after World War II. This time, though, the United States joins it, and to this day is a part of the United Nations. It's created in 1945 at the end of World War II. One different aspect of it, though, is that it has two significant bodies within its structure. One is its General Assembly, which just means representatives from all over the world that vote on things and decide what to intervene in or how to tackle a worldwide problem. But there is a second powerful part of the UN called the Security Council, and it's really dominated by, or was dominated following World War II, by the United States and the Soviet Union. And the Security Council had very specific and powerful ways to really direct the decisions of the United Nations. So where you would like to think that the United Nations represents a kind of international unity, it really became influenced by the two different poles that are emerging after World War II, which is the United States and democracy on one end and the Soviet Union and communism on the other. So as we talked about in the overview, we're going to see this emerging conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States. To understand that, we need to kind of understand what went on in Eastern Europe as the Soviets were clearing out the Nazis at the end of the war. Remember, the Soviets are allies in World War II. But the way that the European campaign played out is they fought mostly in Eastern Europe against the Nazis, with us fighting mostly in Western Europe. Eventually, the two allies, the Soviets and the Americans, meet in Germany, and it creates a divided Germany, East and West. As the Soviets are freeing a lot of the Nazi-occupied lands in Eastern Europe, they begin to set up pro-Soviet and or pro-communist governments in those nations. This angered President Truman and Americans who felt that they had an agreement from the Soviets to give those nations self-determination. In other words, to let them choose and set up their new governments and or set up governments that were friendly or pro-democracy. From the Soviets' point of view, though, they had endured centuries of invasions from Europe. For example, Napoleon invaded Russia. Hitler had just invaded them, and they were determined to set up what they called a buffer zone that would stall future invaders. They wanted friendly nations that would endure, and they thought prevent invasions from Western Europe.